There's a moment when someone's gaze pierces us, and everything inside us becomes disorganized. A tiny gesture, a word thrown at random, and suddenly something inside us breaks. Our center gives way, and we're seized by a force we don't understand. Why do certain people make us lose our composure in seconds? Why is it that before them, all the serenity we thought we possessed disappears, giving way to reactions that seem to come not from us, but from something ancient, forgotten, and unsettling? Carl Jung would call this the awakening of the shadow. It's not just a fleeting emotion, it's the echo of something deep, hidden, stirring in the silent layers of the psyche. What we reject in ourselves, anger, fear, pride, the need for recognition, remains alive, waiting only for a stimulus to manifest. And it is precisely in the presence of those we call toxic people that this impulse awakens most strongly. But what is a toxic person after all? It's the colleague who smiles while undermining your confidence with small ironies, the friend who turns affection into disguised competition, the family member who makes you feel guilty simply for being who you are. They don't appear in our lives as villains in the usual sense. They come as distorted mirrors, reflecting what we haven't yet had the courage to look at in ourselves. According to Jung, the shadow is the sum total of everything we don't want to admit about who we are. It's not evil. It's simply the unlived territory of the soul. It's the envy hiding behind humility, the desire for control masquerading as care, the repressed anger masquerading as calm. And when we don't acknowledge these forces, they seek release, not within but outside of us. Thus, projection is born. We attribute to others the traits we can't bear to see in ourselves. Think of someone who incessantly criticizes others' weaknesses. Perhaps they hide a desperate fear of being seen as useless, or someone who manipulates others' feelings. Often they're someone who has never felt loved unconditionally. They are wounded beings, living in the fog of the unconscious. Wounded and therefore dangerous, for they lash out to avoid feeling their own pain. And when we react in the same way, we become part of the same mirror. Respecting yourself, therefore, isn't about hitting back harder. It's about having the courage to remain centered when everything around you tries to tear you away. True strength isn't about defeating others, but about not losing yourself. Jung said that those who don't face their own shadow will continue to find it projected onto the people who disturb them most. They are messengers of the unconscious, living proof that there's still something unintegrated within us. The unconscious is like an ocean that stretches beneath the solid ground of consciousness. On the surface, we speak, think, and decide, but beneath lie ancient currents, dormant memories, inherited fears, and never-healed wounds. When a toxic being crosses our path, they touch these deep waters. The inner sea stirs and the waves of what was forgotten surge violently to the surface. It is not the unconscious that hurts us. It is we who, upon seeing it, feel the call of what has not yet been healed. Imagine someone who repeatedly gets involved with controlling people. Always the same pattern: jealousy, subtle blackmail, belittling words. The tendency is to blame fate, to believe it's bad luck to attract that kind of person. But under the light of symbolic psychology, something else reveals itself. Within this person also lies the fear of being controlled, the dread of surrendering, the wound of vulnerability. What is unacknowledged within returns from without, disguised as destiny. That's why, for Jung, toxic people aren't just obstacles, they're bridges. They reveal where the unconscious still dominates consciousness. They do the invisible work of confronting us with the truths we dare not speak. The challenge isn't to fight them, but to understand what within us responds to their call. Some believe that self-knowledge is a luminous journey, made of peace and harmony. But Jung knew that all true light must penetrate the subterranean depths of the soul. It is necessary to descend into the inner ruins, touch the shadow, feel the weight of the emotions we avoid. Only then does consciousness expand. Only then is it possible to look at others, even the most destructive, and react not with anger, but with understanding. Because understanding isn't about accepting abuse. It's about seeing its origins. It's about knowing that if we remain unconscious, we'll always be drawn to the same figures, the same dramas, the same mirrors. The unconscious is persistent. It will call again, under different guises, until we respond. And when we finally do, something changes. The energy previously spent on defense transforms into presence. Our gaze becomes firmer. Our heart, though still vulnerable, is no longer hostage to our reactions. There's no need to defeat anyone anymore. Just don't betray yourself. The first lesson is this: those who hurt us don't come just to tear us down, but to reveal what still bends within us. Every difficult encounter is a summons from the unconscious, a reminder that the soul yearns to become whole. But what happens when, instead of reacting, we choose to remain still in the face of provocation? What awakens in others, and in us, when the cycle of reactivity is broken? Unconsciously, we choose those who control us because, in some silent place within our souls, we believe that being controlled is safer than facing our own fragility. It's a kind of invisible pact, an agreement made between fear and the desire for protection. Carl Jung compared human beings to a coin with two sides. On one side, the light of consciousness, what we're proud of, what we show the world. On the other, the shadow, the dark territory where we keep everything we fear revealing. Toxic people at their deepest level are those who live trapped only by their shadow. They don't know they're being guided by the unconscious. They attack to escape themselves. They need the other person to suffer to feel strong. And most tragically, they don't even realize what they're doing. When we understand this mechanism, our perspective changes. Instead of seeing the other as an enemy, we begin to see them as a symptom of a wounded soul, of a consciousness that has not yet awakened to its own pain. Just as someone with an open wound can hurt anyone who comes near, a soul in pain spreads suffering around them. Understanding this is not justifying destructive behavior, but freeing yourself from the burden of interpreting it personally. You don't need to carry the wounds of those who don't want to heal them. A woman once told me that she always got involved with people who belittled her. Men and bosses, friends and family. Everyone seemed to find her a target for contempt or manipulation. For years, she wondered why she attracted this type of relationship. One day, exhausted, she decided to remain silent in the face of provocation. She didn't respond. She didn't defend herself. She didn't cry. She simply observed what was happening inside her. Her racing heart, the desire to justify herself, the fear of rejection. And then she realized it wasn't the other person controlling her. It was the fear of losing love, the fear of being forgotten. That moment of clarity was like a portal. The other person lost their power at the exact moment she recognized what was reacting inside her. Every time a toxic person hurts you, your unconscious is calling you inward. It's an invitation to see what still needs to be integrated. The emotion that arises, anger, humiliation, despair, is not the enemy. It's the signal. It points to the part of you that still needs to be seen. Jung said that awakening doesn't happen by trying to change the other person, but by turning your gaze inward, recognizing the voice that reacts. The moment we can say, it's the wounded part of me speaking now, is the moment we begin to step out of the game. And there's something almost mystical about this. The toxic person loses their power the very second you become aware. While you react, they control you. When you observe, you are the one who leads. Self-respect is born from this place, not from resistance, but from lucidity, not from the need to win, but from the ability to remain whole. One morning, a man woke up determined to confront the boss who had been humiliating him for months. He planned his speech, rehearsed his words. When he arrived at the office, the other man was already waiting for him with the same cold gaze. Everything in him said, "I'm going to destroy you again." But this time, something had changed. The man took a deep breath, didn't say what he had rehearsed. Instead, he simply responded calmly and clearly, without anger, without excuses. When he left, he felt neither triumph nor defeat. He felt lightness. For the first time, he had fought not against the other, but against the urge to abandon himself. And he won. This is the true exercise of self-respect, not reacting automatically, not allowing others to decide who you are. When we understand the nature of the shadow, it ceases to threaten us. When we understand the nature of toxic people, we no longer need to hate them. We simply don't allow them to invade the light. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. Becoming conscious is the hardest and most liberating work. It means facing our own contradictions, realizing where we become similar to what we condemn. Everyone at some level has been toxic to someone. When we manipulate to be loved, when we demand from others what we don't give ourselves. The difference lies in recognizing it. The unconscious, once illuminated, no longer has the same power to command. Every relationship is, in fact, the meeting of two unconscious minds. It's not just you talking to someone, it's your shadow dialoguing with the other shadow. That's why there are encounters that transform us and others that destroy us. It all depends on how much consciousness there is on each side. In a world dominated by appearances, where everyone tries to show only their bright side, recognizing the shadow is a revolutionary act. It demands humility, courage, and a strange form of love. Love for what within us is still imperfect, contradictory, and unfinished. True light does not exclude darkness. It contains it, and it is in this balance that self-respect flourishes. If you've made it this far, you may have already felt something shift within you. A part of you is more awake, more serene, because understanding the shadow is like lighting a flame in a forgotten cave. The space is still the same, but now there's light, and it is from this light that practice is born. For understanding is only the beginning. Living awake is the true challenge. The world will continue to test your center. The same face, the same pattern, the same provocation will reappear. Different on the outside, identical on the inside. And each time this happens, you will be called to choose. React as before or respond from the new awareness. The choice seems small, but it is in it that destiny bends. In the next part, we'll see what happens when this awareness begins to take hold, when the gaze becomes so lucid that even darkness bows before it. This is when transformation finally ceases to be theory and becomes living alchemy. There's an almost imperceptible moment between impact and reaction. It's the space in which the unconscious decides whether you will be free or enslaved to yourself. Carl Jung clearly saw that the real danger lies not in the toxic person before us, but in the unconscious impulse that awakens within us when they provoke us. It's the ancient animal that inhabits the human mind, shaped by millennia of survival and defense. When someone hurts you, the reaction is immediate. Attack, prove, conquer. But it's precisely at that moment that the shadow takes over. If you don't recognize it, you become the perfect reflection of what you despise. The first act of liberation is to admit it exists. We all carry within us the possibility of reacting with arrogance, jealousy, envy, or selfishness. The difference lies only in who has the courage to look at it. When someone disrespects you and anger invades you, it's not the other person dominating you, it's your shadow asking to be seen. Instead of fighting this feeling, observe it. Feel the voice that says, I need to defend myself. Ask yourself, what exactly am I trying to protect myself from? The fear of being ignored, the shame of not being good enough, or an old wound that still bleeds silently? What if anger isn't the enemy, but the messenger? What if it's just showing the part of you that still believes it depends on the gaze of others to exist? Imagine yourself in a meeting. Your idea is interrupted, criticized in front of everyone. Your body reacts before your mind realizes. Your face heats up, your chest tightens, sharp words emerge ready. But something inside you remembers. Wait, who's speaking now? It's the fear of rejection, perhaps the memory of times your voice wasn't heard. In that exact moment, if you can name the emotion, you are no longer held hostage by it. You are not the anger, just the witness observing it. And this simple recognition is the beginning of freedom. But is it possible to remain lucid in the midst of the storm? Jung said that self-mastery is not born of resistance, but of awareness. Creating a space between emotion and action, even for a few seconds, is a sacred act. When someone provokes you, try waiting 3 seconds before responding. Count mentally, breathe, feel the fire rising, but don't burn yourself in it. Observe it, as one observes a flame dancing within one's own body. This is the moment when the shadow loses its power. The impulse transforms into presence, and what previously controlled you becomes illuminated by attention. In a world accustomed to haste, anyone who pauses becomes mysterious. Why didn't they react? Why didn't they defend themselves? Because something deeper is happening. Consciousness has returned to the helm. But what to do when the anger is too great to be contained by breathing alone? Transform it. Write it down. Grab a notebook and record every raw emotion. Today, when she humiliated me, I felt, and write uncensored, unfiltered, until the words replace the scream. By doing so, you convert energy into light. What was destructive force becomes expression. Many are surprised to find that after writing, their anger diminishes by half. The emotion has been brought to the surface where conscious gaze can touch it. Jung called this process shadow integration. When the unconscious ceases to be an enemy and becomes raw material for growth. But be careful. Repressed emotions don't disappear. They just change form. They transform into tension, anxiety, or unexpected outbursts. Therefore, the secret is not to repress them, but to release them consciously. Some find relief by drawing, others by meditating, others by dancing until they feel their bodies empty. The shadow needs movement, otherwise it sickens the spirit. What if you could talk to your shadow? Close your eyes. Imagine her sitting in front of you, a figure with uncertain contours made of the emotions you avoid. Tell her, I know you're here. I know you're angry, afraid, and wanting revenge, but I won't let you lead me. This dialogue, though symbolic, is one of the most effective ways to bring the unconscious to light. The shadow cannot bear to be looked at head-on. It feeds on oblivion, on silence. Once acknowledged, it loses its power. A man who spent years being humiliated by a superior said that after practicing this imaginary conversation, he realized something unexpected. In his dream, the aggressor appeared small, almost childlike, begging to be heard. The next morning, upon seeing his boss, he felt compassion instead of fear, not because the other person had changed, but because something inside him had been freed. Is it possible that the shadow, when accepted, becomes an ally? Jung believed so. The same energy that destroys when understood can build. Anger can become clarity, fear, wisdom, sadness, depth. It all depends on the degree of awareness with which we look at what we feel. No emotion is an enemy, just an invitation to explore the invisible territory of the soul. Over time, practicing presence creates a kind of silent invulnerability. You remain sensitive, but you don't break. You continue to feel, but you don't react automatically. The world continues to provoke, but your center remains firm. This inner stability is true spiritual power. There is no glory, no spectacle, only the stillness of those who have discovered that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to remain whole within it. But what happens when, instead of just observing the shadow, we decide to integrate it completely, to merge light and dark into a single consciousness? This question marks the journey that begins in the next part, where what was once just resistance transforms into alchemy, the moment when the inner fire, previously destructive, finally begins to purify. Awakening, for Carl Jung, was not a state of perfection, but the courage to remain conscious within one's own chaos. Meditating with the shadow is accepting the opportunity to sit with discomfort and ask it what it's trying to protect. Most aggressive, defensive, or angry reactions arise from inner parts that have been wounded and learned to survive by attacking. When you listen, rather than resist, the shadow begins to dissolve. It disappears not through force, but through understanding. Refusing an instinctive reaction is not the same as repression. It is remaining still with awareness. Repression is toxic silence. Conscious refusal is the stillness that observes. When someone diminishes you, don't rush to defend yourself. Observe. Ask yourself, what part of me is being touched right now? With every provocation, there is a crack to lucidity. Imagine for a moment facing someone trying to undermine your confidence. The words come like blades disguised as kindness. The impulse is to respond in kind. But if you resist the urge to prove something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear a voice that has always been there, but hidden beneath the noise of defensiveness. It's the voice of doubt. What if they're right about me? This is the point where the battle ceases to be against the other and becomes an internal confrontation. It's no longer a test of anger, but of faith in one's own worth. What if the real poison isn't in the other person's words, but in your own belief that you deserve them? No human being is completely immune to the pain of being diminished. A single word, placed in the right place, can dismantle years of self-confidence. A cold look, a calculated silence, a cutting sentence, all of these have the power to pierce the ego. But the ego is only the most sensitive part of the psychic system, the point where the unconscious touches the surface. It wants to be recognized, it wants to be right, it wants to be loved. The self, Jung's essential self, doesn't need these things. It is the center and the circumference, the core that remains untouched, even when the world wounds it. When someone attacks you, it's not your essence that's wounded, but the shell you mistake for it. Is it possible to live without other people's opinions defining who you are? Try a simple exercise. The next time someone criticizes you, imagine a glass wall between you. You hear the words clearly, but they don't penetrate. They bounce off the glass. You remain there, present, aware, without denying what was said, but without identifying with it. This is the practice of non-identification. Pain may arise, yes, but if you don't embrace it as part of yourself, it loses its way back to your heart. Awareness creates distance without creating indifference. A study by a group of Swiss psychologists, inspired by Jungian ideas, showed that 73% of people reacted with less emotional intensity when they imagined a transparent barrier between themselves and a hostile interlocutor. It's not magic, it's neuropsychology. The brain interprets the symbolic image as a real boundary, and for the unconscious, symbols are more powerful than facts. But what happens when the attack comes from someone loved? A parent, a partner, a close friend? When the pain comes not from outside, but from the deepest bond. In these cases, the shadow manifests itself more powerfully because it touches the oldest wound, that of not being good enough to deserve love. When someone says, "You're not good enough," and it resonates within you, there's a part of your soul that still believes it, and that part is usually the inner child, frozen in time. Jung asserted that the unconscious is timeless. It preserves pain as if it happened yesterday. The adult reacts, but the one who feels it is the same boy or girl who once felt invisible. Therefore, instead of denying the pain, it's necessary to embrace it. Say, "I see you, I know you're afraid, but now we've grown up and we don't need to believe that anymore." And what if the external attack is just a mirror of what you haven't yet healed? A woman who suffered constant humiliation at work began to imagine an inner garden every night. There, she saw herself sitting under a tree, watching the insulting voices pass by like the wind. She silently repeated, "These voices aren't mine." Within 3 months, she reported that her boss's words no longer affected her. They seemed like distant sounds. Curiously, soon after, his behavior changed. Without the reaction that fueled the conflict, the aggressor lost interest in hurting her. Consciousness, when it consolidates, alters the surrounding field. What was once a struggle becomes silence. What once hurt becomes a learning experience. And this silence is the mark of those who have begun to understand the nature of their own light. But the real test isn't in enduring the attack, but in maintaining your dignity when no one else believes it. Have you ever wondered what would happen if, faced with an insult, you simply smiled, not out of irony, but because you knew who you were? Separating identity from attacks is the second step to awakening. Other people's words say more about them than about you. Every offense is a disguised confession. Every judgment is an inverted mirror. Most people speak to alleviate the burden they carry. When you realize this, you stop believing they're talking about you. You begin to see that they're trying to survive their own shadow. Some Jungian-inspired therapists describe this phenomenon as collective, unconscious mirroring. In toxic environments, shadows recognize each other, waging invisible battles against each other. What appears to be a personality conflict is actually an energetic field where old pains clash. The only way to break the cycle is through individual awareness. The next time you hear criticism, take a breath and ask, where is this voice speaking from? Their pain or mine? This simple question is an invisible shield. It shifts the focus from attack to understanding. And when the focus shifts, the energy transforms. The power of an offense lasts only as long as it takes you to believe it. And it is at this point that the path deepens. Because when you become immune to approval and rejection, something within you awakens to a freedom that is independent of anything external. In the next part, this awakening will reveal itself no longer as resistance, but as full presence, the moment when consciousness finally ceases to be defense and becomes light in motion. There are times when silence weighs more than 1,000 words. When someone attacks, humiliates, or tries to provoke you, your mind ignites in defense, as if your very survival instinct has awakened. But it is precisely there, between impulse and response, that true power begins. Carl Jung said that when you become the observer of yourself, the unconscious loses control over your actions. Try closing your eyes for a moment and imagining the scene as if it were a movie. You see two figures, you and the other, arguing. Observe from the outside without taking sides. Gradually, the tension subsides. Your body relaxes. Your heart slows. Because in that instant, you've stepped out of the role and returned to center. The offense still exists, but it no longer pierces you. Many describe this experience as if an invisible curtain were drawn back within them. The noise of the world continues, but the mind falls silent. A man who always reacted impulsively said that, as he learned to observe himself, he realized something he had never noticed before. The voice that made him react wasn't his own. It was inherited. It was his father's voice, echoing within, demanding respect at any cost. The day he understood this for the first time, he remained silent in the face of provocation, and in the silence, he felt something break, not in pain, but in liberation. But what happens when you stop fighting the one who hurts you? What's left after the need to prove yourself disappears? What remains is what has always been there, you. No other human being has the right to define your worth. No gaze can add to or subtract from what is already part of your essence. When this truth takes hold, every attack becomes a distant echo, a sound that finds no surface to resonate. You hear without being hurt. You see without being swept away. And each time you don't react, your light expands. Not as resistance, but as presence. However, understanding one's own worth is only half the battle. The other half is remaining whole without reflecting the venom that comes from others. The human mind tends to mirror what it receives. When someone yells, you want to yell. When someone hurts, you want to hurt back. This is the psyche's oldest reflex, the shadow's reflection. Jung called it the cycle of unconscious mirroring. Two shadows dialoguing with each other, while their true selves remain absent. This is why many conflicts seem endless. They are mirrors reflecting themselves endlessly, with no light shining through. But what would happen if suddenly one of the mirrors refused to reflect? Stop. Break the pattern. A single moment of awareness is enough to dissolve the game. Imagine arriving at work and hearing the same old irony. Late again, huh? You must have been admiring your own reflection. The impulse is to respond, defend, and hurt back. But this time, something shifts. You look into their eyes, smile slightly and say, "You look tired today, I hope everything's okay." Then you walk away. No sarcasm, no anger, just presence. In that moment, you did what the ego fears most. You didn't react. Conscious silence is the most powerful blow against the shadow. It disarms the aggressor, confuses the collective unconscious that expects conflict, and, most importantly, reveals who is truly awake. Because when you don't play the game is over. An experiment conducted with a group of professional mediators showed that, in intense discussions, the simple act of pausing for 3 seconds before responding reduced the chance of the conversation escalating into an insult by more than 60%. What many consider a weakness is actually self-control. Pausing is the space in which the soul breathes. But there's something even deeper happening. When you stop reflecting toxicity, the other person sees themselves, perhaps for the first time. Without the mirror of conflict, they're forced to face their own emptiness. Some flee, others rage, but a few awaken. And so, without preaching any lessons, without raising your voice, you become a different mirror, the mirror of consciousness. Why then is it so difficult to maintain this serenity? Because the ego wants to prove itself. It wants justice to be done now. It wants the other person to feel the weight of its own words. But true consciousness doesn't seek justice. It seeks balance. It's not about accepting abuse, but about refusing to become a reflection of what hurts you. This requires strength, and that strength comes from the silent recognition. I am not what they say. I am what observes. A woman reported that after years of living with a verbally abusive partner, she decided to stop reacting. At first, it felt like submission. Then she realized her silence was breaking the cycle. He would yell, and she would just take a deep breath, saying, "I'm not going to put up with this." 3 months later, his behavior began to change. Not because she convinced him, but because her lack of reaction forced him to look at himself. This is the invisible power of consciousness, transforming the environment without using force. What if true victory was not silencing the other, but remaining at peace before him? When awareness sets in, something curious happens. You not only become immune to the offense, but you begin to feel compassion for the offender, because you understand that they live in the same labyrinth of pain that was once yours. The difference is that you've found the way out. And at that point, life stops being a struggle and becomes a living mirror of learning. Every provocation becomes a portal, every bitter word, an invitation to stay awake. Anger transforms into lucidity, pain into wisdom, fear into silent power. The shadow finally begins to serve the light. But there is one final test, the most subtle of all. The moment when, even enlightened, you are put to the test again. Someone hurts you, the world opposes you, injustice touches you, and for a moment, the old impulse returns. This is when consciousness shows whether it has truly matured. In the next part, the last, we will see what happens when this state of presence becomes permanent, when the human being stops merely reacting to life and begins to create it from the silent center where nothing can be harmed. This is the point at which awakening is complete, and what was shadow finally bows before the light. There's a moment when everything you've learned is contained in a single gesture, breathing. When anger comes, don't fight it. Just say silently, "This is anger, it's not me." By naming the emotion, you separate yourself from it. It's no longer the mirror that reflects, but the observer who looks through it. It's at this point that awareness begins to operate. You stop responding to pain with pain and begin to see what's really happening. Because most of the time, the other person isn't attacking you out of malice. They're simply acting from their own wound. Those who humiliate were once humiliated. Those who must win at any cost carry the ancestral fear of being forgotten. When you see this, hatred loses its meaning. Anger transforms into compassion, and compassion, far from making you weak, is the highest form of strength. Being compassionate isn't about accepting the unacceptable. It's about refusing to be poisoned by the same poison. Sometimes you'll feel the urge to respond, to defend yourself, to prove your worth. But remember, mirroring isn't just about the words, but about the energy you transmit. If you speak to win, you're still stuck in the game. If you speak from clarity, you break it. Say what needs to be said calmly, without hurting, without justifying yourself. Instead of saying, "Don't talk to me like that," say, "I won't continue this conversation while the tone is like that." Short, firm, and clear. When you don't return the brick thrown at you, the wall of mirrors collapses. The world will never be free of toxic people, but what really matters is how far they can reach you. If they only touch the ego, there's a reaction. If they touch the self, they encounter emptiness, and the emptiness doesn't react. Like an arrow thrown into the wind, the offense simply falls useless. At this point, you're not just defending yourself. You're experiencing the process Jung called individuation, becoming who you truly are. The awakened individual doesn't seek permission to exist. They understand that the greatest self-respect is to protect the inner space where their truth resides. And that's where the power of boundaries comes in. Setting boundaries isn't an act of opposition, but of awareness. It doesn't begin with, "I'm going to teach a lesson," but with, "What value of mine needs to be protected now?" Most people fear setting boundaries because they confuse love with total acceptance and believe that saying no is rejection. But boundaries are what make love possible. Without them, love dissolves into submission. Imagine your soul as a house. Each person who enters brings with them an atmosphere, a presence. You always leave the door open. Everyone comes in, leaves a trail and leaves. And one day you realize you no longer live there. Setting boundaries is learning to take care of your own home, not to isolate yourself, but to ensure that when you open the windows, the air that enters is clean. Some fear appearing selfish by protecting themselves, but selfishness is demanding that others sacrifice themselves for us. Self-care is preventing our own essence from being erased. Every time you say no to what hurts you, you are saying yes to what strengthens you. And this is the beginning of true freedom. He who lives to please loses his soul. He who lives in truth, even if it displeases, finds peace. Carl Jung said that the privilege of a life is to become who you truly are, and no one becomes whole by dissolving into everything. There's a simple but powerful practice to get started. Write your boundaries as promises. 3 clear, definitive sentences. I have the right to leave conversations that diminish me. I don't need to justify my rest. I can disappoint others if it means being true to myself. Read these sentences every morning. They're not mantras of resistance, but reminders of awareness. Boundaries aren't erected once. They're choices renewed every day. The path of consciousness doesn't end with recognizing the shadow, but with integration. The shadow that once controlled you now becomes your guide. What once hurt you now teaches you. Life ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a laboratory of presence. You begin to realize that every provocation is a lesson in disguise. Every pain is a mirror that leads you back to your essence. The world doesn't change. Your perspective changes. And when your perspective changes, everything reorganizes around clarity. At some point, you'll notice that situations that once unbalanced you no longer affect you. Not because you've become insensitive, but because you've learned to feel without losing yourself. Anger still comes, but now it's brief. Sadness still touches, but it no longer paralyzes. And joy, when it arrives, is silent and profound. You no longer live running from suffering, but learning from it. This is awakening. Now, look within. Ask yourself, what in me still reacts when another hurts me? This is the question that begins the true path. Not the path of control, but of awareness. Because awakening doesn't happen in a mystical instant, but in simple gestures. Breathing before reacting, listening before judging, observing before acting. You can start today. You don't have to wait for peace to arrive from outside. It arises the very moment you decide not to reproduce the pain the world inflicts on you. Be the space where the cycle breaks. Be the point of light where the mirror goes out. If this journey touched you in any way, made you think, breathe differently, or simply feel more present, leave a comment. Like the video, comment, even anonymously, and subscribe to the channel. This way, we keep alive this flame of consciousness that, little by little, transforms the way we see ourselves and each other. Because the awakening of one is the beginning of healing for all.